There are two things that I would like you to consider. First of all, I haven't reviewed a gaming laptop in quite a while, so I could be a little bit rusty when it comes to that. But I also know that some of you just want more gaming laptops in the future, and I will try to satisfy that need. The next thing would be the price. Usually I review more higher-end devices and therefore have higher standards. And I could sound a little bit more picky, but just because I see this as a whole, there are just laptops that cost 2 times or 3 times as much as this one. But I totally acknowledge the price to performance ratio on this one. And in this review, I want to let you how good that is. So let's switch to the first thing, design and build quality. And yes, for this price you just have to make a few compromises and sacrifices, because the build quality is not that great, because as you can hear, it does creak, the lid also does bend a little bit or flex, and here as well. But for this price I can't really complain, because I've held already so much worse things in my hand, so this is actually still very fine. I also kind of like the design. Yes, with 2.6 kilograms it's definitely quite heavy, but I have to say it looks quite stylish. Of course it looks like a gaming laptop, but that is completely fine on my end. On the bottom you can also see the rubberized feet, you can see the front firing stereo speakers, and also the ventilation. So in that regard, actually totally fine. Now let's check the ports. What do we get here? Here we have the Kensington lock, the port for the charging, USB 3.0 and full-size SD card reader, which is nice to see, and the headphone jack. On the front we can see some LEDs, and on the right side we can see USB Type-C. Unfortunately this is not Thunderbolt, but I don't think that's all that important on a gaming laptop like this one. We get 2 times USB 3.0 again, and full-size HDMI with the Ethernet along that. So all in all, I think that would have been already it. Can this device be opened one-handed? Yes, it can, of course, because it's quite big after all. Now, let's take a little bit of a closer look at this keyboard. And I will just unlock so we can get into that. And I have to say, the keyboard actually, along with the inside here, is absolutely fine, because this is just plastic like the overall device itself, but it feels quite good and it doesn't really get warm, which is quite nice. I have to say the keyboard, it is backlit in red with 2 steps, and the travel is absolutely okay. It's not super deep, but it's quite nicely dampened. It's also, as you can hear, a very quiet keyboard, and the tactile feedback is okay. It's maybe ever so slightly mushy, so overall it's still at least quite good, if not even better. We have all the extra functionality. What I don't like so much is that I have to press the function button to raise the volume or the brightness, especially since the brightness also gets changed quite delayed. But what is nice, we have a num keypad, which is okay. The overall typing experience is good, so no further complaints. It is of course not the very best one, and for gaming I think you will still maybe use an extra keyboard, but just for typing and so on, this one totally does the job. The trackpad on its own also would have done that, because as you can see here, of course it clicks, which is nice, and it feels quite quality because it doesn't have a gap between something that you can hear, and also it reacts, all gestures get accepted very well, and even 3-finger gestures and all. It is very precise. The only thing that I could complain about is that I think it's just a little bit too grippy, so like kind of too sticky to be precise. I would wish for a little bit less resistance, but other than that, that is fine. And that's why I would like to already go to the display, zoom in a little bit so you can see things a little bit better, even though due to my camera there will be some more ray effect. So let's get through the values just real quick, cover those. We have of course here a 15.6-inch IPS display with a resolution of 1080, which is absolutely fine, but as you can see here, only 65% of sRGB and 50% of Adobe RGB. This is not a great value, but I have to say this is, for anyone who's not into graphics, absolutely not a problem, because as you can see, gamma was quite nice. When it comes to the brightness, yes, it could definitely be brighter, because I actually had to play most games to get a great experience at full brightness, or at least let's say 80%. Black values are okay. Contrast is, I would say, at least decent. What is quite good is actually the white point, because that one is not as cold as on some other devices out there on the market. And what I just want to point out, of course, 15.6 inches 1080p means no scaling issues at all, which is absolutely nice. The white point, as you can see, is set quite okay, but you can also say there is some little bit of diminishing of the brightness towards the side, but that was nothing that I really bothered about or noticed in normal use. Black, it is quite uniform, it's quite deep, but we have some light bleed, maybe for example on this spot and this spot, something that you can't see. It didn't really bother me because it's not all that much, but of course it's visible. What you will see though, and I will put the screen, if you flex the screen, you will see some color shifting and so on. So if I try to maybe zoom in a little bit, you see sometimes some shifting, which is actually not that bad here on this unit, so it's quite okay. no further complaints. And that's why I would actually already say let's go to the sound, because this display on its own is still quite good. No real problems. Of course, one thing that I would like to point out is that it's maybe not the perfect gaming display, because this is obvious, because you get a budget gaming laptop and therefore you get a budget gaming display, because I saw some little bit of ghosting and the input lag and so was not on the very best level, but it wasn't all that bad either. So it definitely is in line with the overall device's quality, so nothing major to complain about. And that's why I would say let's check the sound. The beginning was actually just at about 80%. The last part was at 100%. And I have to say, I really like the speakers because they are very loud. They sound quite full and rich. Okay, I gotta point out also one thing, that I'm not quite the biggest fan of the Dolby software, because it doesn't really give you all that much flexibility, because yes, you have different kind of presets, but the problem is that they also are the exact same one for the headphone jack. So you will have to maybe set up different kind of profiles or just select it. But it is at least there, you have an equalizer and so on, even though it just isn't necessary, for example, on the headphone, where it is maybe on the speaker. But the speaker sounds absolutely full and rich. It didn't distort. Overall problem, sound quality was. The only thing that I noticed that during games, it definitely wasn't good enough. For movies and TV shows, YouTube, everything, yes, absolutely, very loud. Games, though, are just not as loud, and there it maybe wasn't good enough. No. I would say let's go into the next thing. And by the way, the headphone jack is of good quality without any issues as well. Now let's check the SSD values. These are very good, because as you can see here, the read speeds along with the write speeds. Okay, those would be even better if you get the bigger SSD, but are fine. What was absolutely great though was on cold boot at about 7 to 8 seconds. This is one of the best values that I had so far. Of course, the HDD values aren't all that great. As you can see, it's just about there, so you can storage stuff, but definitely not a great one, because it's also just a 5400 rotations per minute drive. Of course, I don't have to show how smooth scrolling is in the browser and so on. This is nothing for this device, and this is actually that brings me to the performance, because with this one, now you can also video edit without any issues, because after all, we have a quad core with a GTX, so you get CUDA core acceleration. And this was absolutely no problem. Of course, then use the SSD, you won't get much fun on the HDD. But all these, of course, and also daily tasks like also video edit and photo editing can be done without an issue. The next thing that I would like to cover, but I also have to point out that I just ran out of time due to my kind of short deadline, is the review process for games, because usually what I do is a gaming review for every laptop and also some footage. I didn't get the time to make that, so I will just point out what I think about the performance for games. What you can expect, if you have AAA titles, I would still say you can get at least about medium settings on 1080p, which will give you then almost consistent or at least very close to 60 frames per second. If you have some slightly older games, you can easily even go to high, maybe sometimes even ultra settings, and still reach those 60 frames per second. This is on the charger though, because what I would like to point out, of course, games like CSGO run with like 120 frames, but it will little bit get slower without the charger, because there it actually isn't the average frames that get so much low, because for example one game was at around 60 and without it was on 55, but what it did without the charger was drop quite often down to 30 frames, which doesn't happen. And this is also that I wanted to point out, battery booster on all that was turned off, so this was to get the best performance out of the battery and just on the device in general, because of course with the battery booster you can get battery life, but I will talk about why that is not really an option. But I would say the next thing to talk about would be the heat and noise, and starting off again with the noise demo. Okay, you've heard the fans, and what I want to point out is just one thing, that this device, if it's not as hot as here, because in the room here when I did my heat testing it's about 33 degrees, which is just way too hot. Down there where I actually tested my device, it was way colder, and in actual normal use this device can actually stay completely silent. The only thing that you could hear sometimes, of course, is the HDD spinning, but otherwise this device is almost silent. And even if the first level kicks in, which wasn't available on this noise demo because I had to start start at like 2, because the first level here was just not reachable because it was just too warm here. So if you are in normal conditions, you will have a pretty much almost silent device in normal use, which is absolutely nice, because I've reviewed in the past gaming laptops that pretty much had the fan spinning all the time, which is nice to see that it's not the case here. But also one thing, if you've heard the maximum fan noise, don't really bother, because this was the maximum noise level at 100% as CPU and GPU, which is not the case though in normal load, because either you maybe use something like Adobe and then you have mostly CPU load, and if you play games, it's mostly a mix, so nothing is at 100% all the time. So what you can mostly expect is one step below the maximum noise, and I think that one was of course audible, but in normal gaming I actually never really bother about the performance, I mean about the noise, so actually quite good here. When it comes to the temps though, I want to get into one thing. On the bottom we had temperatures about on the sides 36 degrees to in the middle where the CPU is at 45 degrees. On the upper part like 1 degree less, and I have to say this part always stays absolutely fine. You never feel like you would burn your hands, so nothing to really be concerned about. The CPU temperatures were at the average about 53% and 57%, but what, just again keep in mind it was very hot here. Usually down there below it was like almost 10 degrees lower. Under load things of course change a little bit. The actual bottom got a little bit hotter, 36 to 52 degrees in the middle, with the bottom being at about 50 here, but still nothing you really notice that much. The CPU though got up to 89% with an average about 84%, which sounds quite a lot, and it actually for one split second did throttle, but this was just I think because until the fan could speed up. And therefore, I would say in terms of noise, for a gaming laptop during gaming, actually surprisingly silent, or surprisingly not that loud, and during normal use pretty much silent, which was nice. I could not really hear any coil while, maybe due to the hard drive spinning and so on, and in terms of heat, absolutely still fine. The battery would be the next thing to be called out, and here I just want to get into one thing that I forgot to show myself, is the charging. So I was right, 2 hours and 25. Now, what you would expect now is for me, if I call out, for example, the performance or the battery performance during gaming, because I could about game at full maximum power for about 1 hour at best. And since this device though charges in 2.5, you might think that it actually isn't able to charge fast enough, but it actually did, because I was at about 37% of battery, and then I plugged in the charger and played, and after like maybe 45 hours of playing, the battery was at 68%. So it is still able to charge even though you are using it under full load. But I would just say, don't think of this device to be a portable gaming machine for all that long. Then you will have to use the battery booster, or I would just say, since this is quite a heavy device, not that portable anyways, you should use it most of the time with the plug, because then you get full performance and you get a quite decent battery life in general. Otherwise, because what I got in normal use is, I would say, about 4 hours, maybe even 5 is what I could get, because I got 4, a little bit more, but I know that I drain my device a little bit harder and I turn off all battery saving technologies. So 5 to maybe even a little bit more are to be expected. And this would have been it. Software-wise, there's not really anything to say. Of course, we have the Dolby software as I showed, and some Acer software. Actually, quite a lot of bloat, but nothing to really be concerned about, because you can deinstall it. Software issues, driver issues, bugs, no, I did not have any sort of that. And that's why I would say let's go into the pros and cons. Here, I want to point out, in my opinion, the still absolutely nice gamer design, the decent build quality. It's of course not great, but for this price range, it's still quite okay in my opinion. We have a quite good keyboard and actually quite good trackpad as well, if it wouldn't be all that sticky. The display in the whole scheme is still good, but for this price range, I can't really complain all that much. We have very good speakers, a good headphone jack, great daily use performance, and it is very good for heavy use like video editing and so on. And for gaming, quite good, because I just have to set a few higher standards here, for example a 1060, 1070 and so on. But for this price range, for 1080p especially, it's still quite a good gaming performance. Mostly silent daily use, the fan noise under load is fine. The decent battery life in normal use is something quite nice to see, and we have a solid value, because this one is priced a little bit lower than some of the competitors. But what's not that great, of course, the chassis creaks and flexes a little bit, the trackpad surface is a little bit too sticky. Display has low color spectrum and is maybe not a particular gaming grade display, which wasn't though to be expected anyways. It gets quite warm, still okay in my opinion though. The HDD is audible, which is obvious of course, and the battery life under gaming or full load wasn't all that great. But I just have to point out one thing once again. this machine in the US, as I found it, actually with even more storage, because what I found on Amazon was for $9.99 this version with 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512. Mine has only 8 gigabytes of RAM and the 256 gigabyte SSD version. So for €1,000 or dollars, I mean, actually, you get an actual quite performant device. The qualities overall definitely match the price point. And if I check the competition, those are usually more expensive, and I can't really quite judge so much the qualities of those. But if I just check, for example, Dell's competitor this year, I have to say this one is way better, because that one, just due to the very, let's say, crappy TN panel, is no match for this one, because this one has a good speaker, a good, very good performance, and still for gaming, absolutely nice budget display. The keyboard is fine. Yes, the build quality isn't amazing, and there are some things like maybe example the fan noise that sometimes gets a little bit whistling, but nothing to really concern about. And from what I've reviewed in the past, especially the other Dell, I think it was a 7559, it was a very popular gaming budget laptop. This one overall is still better. So we made quite a progress from back then. The performance overall got way better. The qualities aren't bad. So I can still absolutely recommend this one with any issues. Of course, there are way better ones, but you also pay way much more. And I've actually already seen this one starting at $799. Of course, I would not go maybe too low. If you can maybe get a little bit more, like 900 or 1000, you can get the i7 version with the 1050 Ti and the SSD. And this is definitely something that I would recommend. But this device as it is, absolutely not bad at all. But I of course need also a few more competitors in this to see how good it actually stacks up. But from my experience in the past and so on, I definitely see these values, and especially for the price, it does an absolutely nice job. So that would have been it. I hope you enjoyed this review, and yes, next time I hope to get also footage for the gaming, which I just unfortunately had no time, because this one has to get shipped out already today. But I hope you enjoyed it. Thumbs up, maybe commentary, and please subscribe to the channel for more, and also hopefully more gaming laptops in the future. Bye. It was so hot. You cannot believe how hard it is sometimes to talk with this heat. Bye.